Hey everyone, Pugs here with 2 new reviews for y'all. Today is a very special review because today, after 3 to 4 months of weekly video making, we're at the last 2 episodes of Season 1, Hooky and Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2. And honestly, it's kind of about to get juicy because one of these episodes is my least favorite of the whole season. Definitely not series though. We're nowhere near close to those duds yet. But let me stop myself there though, because I'll give all my thoughts, during the reviews, and I've got a lengthy closing thoughts segment today, so there will be more to share there. As always, just want to extend a quick thank you to everyone who's been watching, liking, commenting, all of that. You guys are great. I always appreciate the support, and, it helps to motivate me beyond my own self-motivation to, do these reviews. And yeah, so without further ado, let's just get right into these final episodes of Season 1. As I've been covering every episode of SpongeBob SquarePants Season 1, I'm sure some trends have emerged. I love how cute SpongeBob is in this season. I think Season 1 is the slowest of the entire show, but in a chill vibes kind of way. I like learning about Bikini Bottom, and I'd say I'm very clear with the trends in my opinions. And I bring all of this up to say, remember when I made it very explicit that I can't stand secondhand embarrassment? Yeah. Hooky almost always immediately comes to mind when I think of episodes that I just cannot rewatch. And now, before y'all get your pitchforks ready, and, I say that ignoring the fact that I don't actually know what the common consensus is on this episode, I don't actually think Hooky is a bad episode. I think it's very nearly good. The only problem with this episode is that once we get to the second half of it, it feels like I'm watching a train wreck in slow motion. But before I get into all of that, let's just talk about the good first, because there's definitely a lot of it. A real standout of this episode is Mr. Krabs, because, he's really great here. His dramatics about the hooks are just perfectly done, and it makes total sense that he'd be the one to have experience with the hooks, given that, he's our older father figure character. And this episode is pretty neat in that it establishes that, humans still exist in this world. In fact, with the way this show is written, as a whole, it basically takes place on the same Earth we live in now, with, the same historical events happening, etc., etc. So basically, SpongeBob is real confirmed. No. Anyway, SpongeBob and Patrick's antics with the hooks are also pretty funny. And I appreciate that SpongeBob is tentative to play with them at first, which makes for some good interactions with Patrick, who, has absolutely no care whatsoever and is extremely reckless. And then the scene where Mr. Krabs finds out that SpongeBob took a break is also pretty funny. Reminds me a lot of Imitation Crabs. And I love the whole Chum Famine of 59 bit. It's the kind of throwaway world-building line that I like to see. And I also do like the very ending of the episode, and I mean very ending, with the stinger of Patrick getting processed into tuna. Somehow, we're not even going to think about that. But yeah, that's really the only thing that I like, though, that tuna joke that takes place between Mr. Krabs chastising SpongeBob and Patrick and the episode cutting to black. So after SpongeBob swears not to play on the hooks anymore, and, before proceeding to do just that, once losing all resolve, that's where the episode kind of begins to fall apart for me. Well, fall apart is a harsh phrase, but let's just say that my enjoyment of what I am watching crumbles after this point, and it's all because of the secondhand embarrassment. Okay, after being warned over and over, SpongeBob finally gets stuck on a hook, which makes it obvious that this episode is trying to teach a lesson, but it does so in a way that I can't stand. Seeing SpongeBob try to hide the hook in his pants feels like having no choice but to watch an inevitable disaster. We know that there's a foregone conclusion here. Even if it's the first time we've watched this episode, we know it's going to happen. Okay, Mr. Krabs is going to see SpongeBob, and there's going to be a big I told you so moment, and just knowing this makes everything here feel pointless to me. Why are we even bothering with this? But, now that alone, that's not really enough to make me displeased, because, I can enjoy a good foregone conclusion sometimes. Nah. What really gets me ticked off and uncomfortable is the entire scene of SpongeBob basically having to get naked to be free of his hook, which is done to the amusement of Pearl and her friends, which, that's weird. Like, there's really no way around it. That's weird as hell. And somehow it only gets worse because they do the whole thing where they censor part of SpongeBob's front end, which implies that he has some sort of, private area that he does not want to show. And this is made especially clear when he runs off using his hands to cover that part of himself. And so now I find myself questioning what exactly the logic even was here, because this episode is explicitly implying, or really just showing, that these teenagers, okay, let me repeat, teenagers, minors, children, okay, are being exposed to a buck-naked gross man. What? And that this was literally facilitated by other adults. Because then we get the final nail in the coffin, which is the reveal that all of this embarrassment was a setup that Mr. Krabs, Squidward, and Pearl were in on that was meant to teach SpongeBob a lesson about listening to others and not being reckless. Yeah. See, frankly, that shit leaves a bad taste in my mouth. First off, I cannot stand when SpongeBob is the subject of embarrassment like this. I just can't stomach it at all. I've said this multiple times. And maybe it's because I love the little square dude so much. Not sure. Don't really quite care to analyze at the moment. And second off, I have never been a fan of the public embarrassment to teach a lesson type plot. So the most memorable example I can think of right now is, slightly embarrassing, but I'll share it anyway. So when I was much younger, I used to watch, My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. And for anyone familiar with that show, you might remember a little episode called The Mysterious Ne'er-Do-Well. In that episode, a very, very similar plot occurs in order to humble Rainbow Dash. And basically, I hated that shit too. It just feels so uncomfortable to know that this already hard to watch embarrassment is being caused by the subject's friends, no less. Y'all really couldn't have thought of a different way to approach this situation. In real life, the only time I see public shaming being used is when it's something serious, the perpetuation of serious structural issues, not a personality problem. So if a show is going to pull something like that, something that serious has to be the issue, nothing less, because it's just bad. And I guess to really just bring things back home, Hooky is an episode that I used to have in my good tier, but definitely not now. I'm bumping it down because of its sheer lack of rewatchability for me, caused by the second half of the episode. It's just too hard to watch. And, if I'm not getting enjoyment out of watching, then there's really no point. However, although there is much to dislike here, I don't actually, actively dislike this episode. I know it sounded like I did, but I kind of don't. The beginning of Hooky is, really strong. And, I've said before that the characters are enjoyable here. And so, the first half of this episode, that's good. That was definitely great or even amazing tier material. It's just the second half that really just careens this episode down. And so that's why, perhaps surprisingly, this episode is going into my okay tier, coming in with the lowest score so far, and spoiler alert, the lowest score of season 1, a 6.8 out of 10. Well, here we are, y'all. For our final episode of season 1, we've got Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2, which is also, of course, the second installment in this lovely saga. I'd say I'd like this episode a tiny bit more than the first, to be honest, and I'll be upfront about it now. This review will not be nearly as juicy as the last one. Honestly, I feel like I talk a lot more about what this episode represents and what it references than the actual quality of the episode itself, but I do what I want. So the first thing I want to say about this episode is that, as is the norm in these Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes, SpongeBob is pretty adorable here with his fanboying. I love that. The way that he won the conch signal was by making life-size Krabby Patty replicas of the two heroes. I feel like that just says so much about his character. And the conch signal is also a pretty good spoof on the bat signal. And this whole episode is full of spoofs, from the conch signal to the Mermalair to the villains to the song they sing at the very end of the episode. But yeah, the whole section of the episode where SpongeBob participates in heroics with the heroic duo is also just so cute too. And speaking of the duo, I honestly just love that, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy as a concept. Elderly superheroes, who would have thought? I love the approach of making, heroism and, villainy, for that matter, as we can see in this episode, seem like a job that one can retire from. I mean, like, yeah, that's not necessarily a new thing, but usually we like see heroes retiring after like an injury or because they want to take care of their family or something. But nah, like Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, they're just old and they aged out of it. And let's just say it's kind of a breath of fresh air after reading certain comics, cough, cough, DC, and specifically Batman and related vigilantes, cough, that refuse to age up their characters, Another thing I like about this episode is that it exhibits a kind of continuity that we see throughout Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes. So, like, in this little saga, we kind of see a progression of the relationship that SpongeBob and to a lesser extent Patrick have with these heroes. So, like, let me briefly go through real quick. So, like, first episode, right, we meet the duo, and this one, the second one, like, they finally start to actually like SpongeBob, at the end of the episode, and, like, they're familiar with him because of the previous episode, and third episode, SpongeBob and Patrick are watching the Mermalair, which, showcases some level of trust. Fifth episode, SpongeBob and Patrick and Squidward and Sandy are trusted by Mermaid Man to become heroes. And I guess, like, the fourth episode is a bit of a departure from this pattern, as Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy don't actually appear for very long in that episode, and they seem to be at like the attitudes they had in episode 1 or 2, but that's excusable. I just think this kind of continuity is pretty neat. And switching gears a little bit, I'm going to talk about what I feel is the biggest weakness of this episode, which is that it feels kind of disjointed. Like, not only do the two major segments of this episode, the conch shenanigans and the patrol, feel very separate, but one segment is also a whole lot better than the other one, similar to this episode's sister, actually. So to me, it really feels like the conch stuff could have been one episode and that the patrol stuff could have been one episode. The patrol stuff, like, that would have kind of looked like an episode like Mermaid Pants, like that new episode. And these two, like, disparate parts are just kind of stuffed into this one episode, which I kind of feel is a disservice to both of these, like, neat episode ideas. And, like, I really, really enjoyed the patrol segment. Like, it's pretty funny. It's also super wholesome to see SpongeBob hang out with his idols, even if they do try to ditch him in the end, which they end up getting their comeuppance for, so, I don't really have a problem with that. And I honestly could have just done with an episode of just that. Like, just have SpongeBob try and hang out with the elderly heroes at Shady Shoals, and then they bring him on a patrol, simple as that. I think that would have been a better setup than the conch signal. Or at the very least, the conch signal segment could have and should have been simply improved. As it is, it's kind of dull and not really all that funny to me, especially as one of the jokes with SpongeBob in the jar is quite similar to the turning point in Ripped Pants, where SpongeBob pretends to drown. And that joke was like, to me there, and it's to me here. So yeah. And this kind of disjointedness, combined with the significantly worse section, makes this episode lose quite a bit of points with me. And to bring it all together, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2 it's good, but it's an alright kind of good, not like a great kind of good. And I really enjoy the second part of this episode, but it definitely does not help that the weakest part of this episode is the beginning. Like, those initial few minutes are just too dull for me, and I don't really like how this episode doesn't feel cohesive. And so, as you might have guessed, this isn't really an episode that I find myself rewatching very often. So with all of this in mind, I'm going to be placing this episode at the low end of my good tier, where it will come in with a score of 7.3 out of 10. Alright, so I promised some closing thoughts, so I'll give y'all some closing thoughts. Let me start with the episodes, I guess, because there isn't really much to say there. Frankly, this is kind of a disappointing end to season 1, with an okay tier and a good tier episode, but I suppose we did hit the ground running with the greatness that was the pilot trio, so I suppose that's only fair. And also, we're finally starting to get to the episodes where I really started, going off with my reviews, where they started getting really long, so this actually meant that I had more and less editing to do for my script. Less because I had covered everything that I wanted to say about the episode already in my original review, but more because I have to do a lot of restructuring and stuff to make the recorded review flow better than how it did while written, because it's just different. But yeah, so that's fun. And yeah, let me go ahead and get to the juicier stuff too now. So first off, a big thank you to everyone who's been watching my videos. I made the first one out of impulsivity, and then I kind of just kept going, much like my written reviews. But just like those reviews, I just really like making these, even if recording is a bit more difficult than just typing. And, I honestly just can't believe I've made it to the end of season 1 without even like missing a video or anything. So that's pretty impressive for me. And if anyone is wondering about future videos, well, don't fret, because the plan as of now is to continue on like I have been. I'm recording the super fun season 1 overview video, complete with me making a tier list, which should be interesting given that, as a rule, I don't really rank SpongeBob episodes beyond my top 5 and bottom 5 of the season. So I guess this is where those decimal points are definitely going to come in handy. And that video will also be about my thoughts on season 1 as a whole, so it won't just be like rehashing what I've already said in the episode reviews. And I'll probably have an even better like closing thoughts segment in that video, given that that video is going to be like the official finale of like my season 1 reviews before we move on to season 2. And so yeah, that's about all I've got for you guys today. So I will see you guys next time when I do my season 1 overview.